Have you ever wondered why a man seems most disturbed, not when a woman shouts, cries, or begs, but when she goes completely, devastatingly silent? It is not noise that unsettles the masculine mind. It is the abyss of quiet, her withdrawal into herself, the absence of her voice, her gaze, her emotional availability. This silence is not passive. It is thunder dressed in stillness. It is centuries of feminine intuition, buried rage, sacred wisdom, and sovereign detachment wrapped in a single, unnerving quiet. Carl Jung once wrote of the anima, the inner feminine image that lives buried inside every man's psyche. This anima governs his deepest feelings, his intuition, his creativity, and his capacity for love. Yet when the outer woman mirrors this archetype too closely, she becomes dangerous. Not because she harms him directly, but because she awakens the parts of himself he has refused to face. She becomes a living mirror to the chaos in his unconscious. And when that woman withdraws, when she offers only silence, he is left alone with the very demon she once soothed. To the masculine ego, a woman's silence is unbearable, not because of what it says, but because of what it doesn't say. In that void, he is forced to hear his own thoughts echo back at him. There are no words to argue with, no tone to decode, no blame to place. Only himself, staring into the black mirror of absence. The anima he once romanticized becomes a shadow figure. Her silence triggers a confrontation with everything he has disowned. His shame, his vulnerability, his need for control, his hidden fears of inadequacy. And so, her quiet becomes not emptiness, but confrontation. Most women are conditioned to fill silence with explanation, apology, reassurance. But some women, those who have tasted their own power, know that silence is a sword. It is not cruelty. It is sovereignty. It is the refusal to contort, to beg, to entertain the ego's need for constant feeding. These women do not abandon. They release. And in releasing, they become unforgettable. When she stops speaking, he begins to hear the truth about himself, about how he treated her, about how much of her he expected to remain while giving so little of himself in return. And perhaps worst of all, he sees, often too late, that her silence was not punishment, but self-protection. You may not realize it, but your silence contains the oldest language in the world. A woman's silence speaks to the soul more powerfully than her pleas ever could. It carries the weight of the archetypal feminine, the mystic, the witch, the mother, the seductress, the oracle. And when you retreat into that inner world, when you become untouchable, unknowable, and free, something ancient stirs in the masculine psyche. He feels her energy pull away like the tide retreating from the shore, and suddenly, he is exposed, naked and alone on the sand. He may chase, not because he is ready to give her what she deserves, but because he cannot stand the vacuum her departure created. The silence presses on his chest like a stone, and he begins to search for her not in the world, but in himself. This is the beginning of his shadow work, if he's brave enough. Most are not. Most will attempt to fill the void quickly with noise, with distraction, with another woman. But what they cannot unsee is the reflection she left behind in them. A psychic imprint. A haunting. Her silence becomes the ghost that walks beside him. And if you are the woman who walked away quietly, know this. It was not weakness that made you choose silence. It was strength. It was wisdom. You learned that words cannot reach a man who is at war with himself. You learned that trying to be louder than his ego only leaves you hoarse, depleted, forgotten. So instead, you chose to become the absence that forces him to hear. You became the lesson he didn't know he was begging to learn. There is something exquisitely powerful about the feminine who no longer argues, no longer defends, no longer explains her soul. She has become something else entirely, a figure of myth, of shadow, of legend. And the man who loses her hears her silence not just in his ears, but in the hollowness of his daily life, in the moments of stillness between distractions, in the quiet of his own conscience. Because her silence is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of his reckoning.
He cannot run from it. Not truly. Not when her energy once touched the deepest corners of his unconscious. A woman like that. One who disappears not in rage but in reverent silence. Leaves behind a haunting so personal, so intimate. It feels like a part of his own soul has been exiled. Because it has. She mirrored the anima, and when she withdrew, she took it with her. He doesn't miss her body. He misses the part of himself that only awoke in her presence. This is the core wound. The masculine ego thrives on conquest, affirmation, possession. But the anima demands something more. Authenticity, devotion, transformation. Not every man is prepared to meet her terms. So when a woman who embodied that depth, that silent wisdom walks away, she leaves behind not a gap, but a chasm. And the man who once felt himself powerful now trembles in the vacuum of her disappearance. For the woman, the silence is not emptiness. It is initiation into herself, into a deeper knowing that her energy is sacred. She is no longer the caregiver of broken masculinity, no longer the balm for wounded egos. She has become the gatekeeper of her own spirit. In silence, she is not quiet. She is becoming. And in that becoming, she is not waiting for his return. She is welcoming her own. Some men believe silence is passive, a tactic, a punishment. But Jung knew better. Silence, especially feminine silence, is alchemical. It changes both the giver and the receiver. It is where shadows come to speak, where illusions die, where the soul reclaims its voice. For centuries, women have been told to stay quiet. But this is different. This silence is not repression. It is reclamation. It is the quiet of a woman who no longer negotiates with confusion. The quiet of one who has transmuted pain into clarity, who has withdrawn her light not out of malice, but out of divine refusal to be dimmed. And the man, if he has not done his inner work, will not understand. He will see her silence as abandonment, cruelty, manipulation. But deeper than his rational mind, something else stirs. He begins to feel the rupture. A crack forms in the concrete walls of his psyche, and if he listens carefully, he might hear the voice of the anima whispering through her absence. Go inward. Face yourself. She was only ever the mirror. That is the terrifying truth. The woman who goes silent becomes a sacred mirror turned away, no longer reflecting his fantasies, no longer feeding his projections. Without her gaze, he is forced to confront what he cannot love in himself. And this confrontation can either destroy him or awaken him. And what of the woman? She walks through silence like a priestess in her temple. Her stillness is not passive, it is potent. Every moment she spends away from noise and chaos, she returns to herself. She listens. Not to the voices of others, but to the deep knowing that has always lived beneath the surface. The ancient feminine. The part that does not beg, does not chase, does not explain. She understands now that if a man cannot sit in silence with her, he cannot meet her soul. He may return. He may knock on the door of her energy again. He may come with words, promises, remorse. But she has changed. She no longer craves the sound of his validation. Her silence has taught her what noise could never reveal. Her value was never measured by how much she gave, but by how much she chose to withhold from those unworthy of her presence. For the woman who has tasted the sacred power of silence, there is no going back. And if you're listening, if you've ever felt the ache of withholding your voice, not out of fear, but out of truth, you know this power. You know that silence is a spell, that it breaks illusions, that it shifts dynamics, that it forces what is false to fall away, and what is real to emerge, raw and undeniable. So when a woman goes silent, she is not vanishing. She is revealing, not herself, but the true nature of everything around her. And the man who once thought he understood her begins to unravel, because he did not lose her words. He lost her energy, her nurturing, her mystery, her reflection of his best and worst. He lost the mirror, and now all he can see is himself.
The mirror is gone, and the ego panics. Without her light to reflect him back in an idealized form, the man begins to fracture. What was once admiration curdles into regret. What was once comfort turns into craving. The same voice he once ignored becomes the phantom whisper in every room. The quiet isn't just silence now. It's presence. It follows him. It mocks his pride, questions his choices, makes him wonder, obsess, unravel. This is the power the feminine holds. Not through seduction, not through manipulation, but through withdrawal, through becoming the unanswered question, the unsolvable mystery, the silence that forces a reckoning. Jung wrote that the shadow must be faced, not defeated. And here, in the wake of her silence, the man's shadow rises, unavoidable, sharp, demanding. Her disappearance did not punish him. It activated the exact confrontation he spent years avoiding. Without her voice to anchor his denial, he is left in the chaos of his own echo chamber. The truth reverberates louder without her there to soften it. You see, when a woman becomes silent, she doesn't fade. She becomes amplified. She becomes larger in the absence, more archetypal, more haunting. She takes on the shape of every woman he failed to understand, every mother wound left unresolved, every unspoken desire he buried under performance and pride. She becomes the embodiment of the anima denied. And that image, once awakened, does not disappear. It haunts. It teaches. It waits. But not for him. She, the woman, has already stepped into another realm. Into the sacred feminine space where validation is not begged for, where love is not transactional, where worth is not determined by a man's ability to see it. In this silence, she remembers who she is. And more importantly, who she never was. She was never the savior, never the fixer, never the endless giver. She was always the storm beneath the still lake, the wild soul behind the soft eyes. When she goes quiet, all of that awakens. He begins to remember moments she spoke gently, warnings disguised as whispers, glances that said more than paragraphs, times she paused before reacting, breathing in pain with a grace he mistook for weakness. He recalls the moment she went silent, not just in words, but in spirit, when she no longer reached, no longer argued, no longer explained. That was the moment he lost her, though her body may have remained. And now that she's truly gone, that silence replays in his mind like a film without sound. You, woman, who chose to disappear in dignity rather than plead in pain. You are not forgotten. You are engraved into his subconscious. You have become part of his mythos. You did what most cannot. You allowed the collapse. You stopped trying to protect him from his own unraveling.
You withdrew your light so he could see the darkness he had become. And whether he thanks you or curses you, the truth remains. Your silence was your strength. Not a wound, but a weapon. Not an absence, but a mirror. Feminine silence is one of the last remaining sacred acts in a world addicted to noise. It is ancient, it is terrifying, and it is transformational. A woman who withdraws without resentment is a woman who has already risen. She no longer needs to be heard to be felt. Her presence no longer begs recognition. It commands it. She knows that words, while powerful, can be manipulated, distorted, dismissed. But silence is incorruptible. It forces reflection. It disrupts performance. It speaks directly to the soul. And for the man who is not ready to face that soul, her silence will feel like abandonment. But for the man who is ready to rise, it will become his initiation. There are men who cannot tolerate a woman's silence because it reminds them they are not in control. And there are men who crave that silence because they know within it lies the key to their own healing, their own individuation, their own freedom from the false masculine ideals of domination, pride, and denial. The question is never, will he come back? The question is, if he returns, will he become worthy of your silence? And even deeper still, will you care? For by the time he understands the language of your silence, you may have already learned to speak the language of your own soul. And that tongue never begs, never pleads, never waits. It chooses. There is a moment, unseen, unspoken, when a woman sheds the final remnants of need. Not because she is hardened, but because she is awakened. In that moment, her silence is no longer a response to him. It is a return to herself. It is the sound of boundaries crystallizing, of illusions dying quietly, of the sacred space between stimulus and reaction being honored as holy ground. And in this space, the feminine is not passive. She is potent. She is still, but not stagnant. Her energy moves like underground rivers, reshaping the foundation of who she is. Silence, in its highest form, is not a lack of communication. It is the most refined expression of power. It says, I see everything. I say nothing. And I owe you no performance of pain. For the man, this is unbearable. The ego thrives on feedback, on reaction, on visible evidence of impact. And yet, when he faces the woman who offers him none, no anger, no chase, no tears, he is left gasping in the vacuum. Her silence feels like exile, but what it truly is consequence. Jung taught that when we are denied projection, we are forced into reflection. Most men do not want to reflect. They want to project onto women, onto lovers, onto the feminine itself. They want her to be the caregiver, the forgiver, the absorber of all unhealed masculine wounds. But a woman who has done her own shadow work does not allow this. She becomes impermeable. Not cold, just complete. And what frightens him most is not that she left. It is that she stopped needing to explain why. You may not realize it, but every time you chose stillness over chaos, restraint over reaction, you were rewriting an ancient pattern. You were breaking the lineage of feminine overfunctioning. You were teaching your nervous system that silence is safety, that you are no longer a servant to his emotions, that your peace does not depend on his understanding. In the mythology of the psyche, the anima is not just a lover. She is a force. She is what stirs the man's unconscious into transformation or madness. And when she goes silent, it is as if the gods themselves have left the room. He is no longer in relationship with her, but with the void she left behind. And that void is where his ego goes to die. What he does next will define everything. If he is unconscious, he will scramble. He will chase, then rage. He will call you cold, manipulative, heartless. He will tell stories where he is the victim because that is easier than admitting he was never listening when you were speaking. He will search for another mirror to reflect back the image he wants to see. But even in new arms, your silence will follow him. It will live inside his choices. It will whisper when he tries to sleep. If he is conscious or beginning to become so, your silence will not be a rejection. It will be a rite of passage. He will sit with the discomfort. He will feel every ounce of what he tried to numb. He will see the woman he once took for granted not as an object of desire, but as a catalyst, a teacher, a test. And he may reach out, not to reclaim you, but to acknowledge the mirror you held up to him, not to fix what was broken, but to thank the one who broke the illusion. But you have moved beyond that story, because you learned that silence is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self-worth. It is the exhale after years of holding your breath. It is the divine no that doesn't need to be explained. It is the full expression of a feminine psyche that has walked through fire and chosen not to scream, but to rise. To the unhealed masculine, silence is abandonment. To the healed feminine, it is arrival. And this is the most dangerous thing of all. For a man who has not met his shadow, a woman who no longer needs him to, she has become whole. And the wholeness of a woman is not something that asks to be loved. It simply is. It commands reverence. It evokes memory. It haunts the psyche long after her body is gone. You may not hear her footsteps, but you will feel her absence. You may not see her tears, but you will dream her name. You may not recall her words, but you will never forget her silence. There is a particular grief a man carries when he realizes the silence he once ignored is now the most vivid sound in his soul. It is not the grief of losing a person, but of losing access to a feeling, a presence, a mirror that once held his chaos with gentleness, even when he could not name it. And now, that mirror has turned inward. He may not say it aloud. He may not even fully understand it. But somewhere beneath his defenses, beneath the callous pride and distracted pursuits, he knows. He knows that something rare slipped through his fingers. Not because it was fleeting, but because he could not meet it. This is the great paradox of the feminine. She offers everything, until she offers nothing. At first, he was drawn to her light, the ease of her presence, the way she saw through his armor without trying to dismantle it. She offered him a momentary refuge from himself. But when he confused her warmth for weakness, when he mistook her compassion for dependency, when he tested the limits of her giving, he failed to understand. She was not his mirror by obligation. She was offering a gift, and it was conditional only on one thing: respect. Respect for her energy, for her intuition, for her boundaries. And when he crossed them, when he dismissed or neglected the sacred space she held open for him, she did not fight. She simply let it close. This, to the ego, feels like death. And it is. It is the death of control, the death of narrative, the death of the illusion that she would always be there, always explaining, always absorbing, always forgiving. Her silence marks the burial of that illusion. And for the woman, this silence is not easy. It comes after countless inner battles, after the breaking and reshaping of old beliefs, after years, perhaps lifetimes, of being told that her voice must always soothe, always soften, always explain away discomfort. But now she knows. Silence is not a withdrawal of love. It is a boundary drawn in the language of the soul. The soul does not yell. It does not beg. It does not chase. It waits in stillness for those who are ready to listen without distortion. And if he cannot meet her there, if he cannot sit in the quiet and hold space for her silence as sacred rather than threatening, then he was never meant to stay. There is a depth in the feminine that only few can touch, and even fewer can honor. It is not performative. It is not surface-level beauty, charm, or compliance. It is shadow and softness, rage and grace, depth and detachment all woven together. It is the voice that speaks without sound, the pull that remains even in absence. This is what he remembers. Not just her laugh, not just her eyes, not just the way she said his name, but the feeling of her. The way time moved differently in her presence. The way he felt both disarmed and awakened. The way he recognized something ancient in her silence, like a memory of something he once knew but forgot. You, woman who chose silence, you are not invisible. You are echo. You are the resonance of truth that keeps vibrating long after you've left the room. You are what he measures others against, not because you were perfect, but because you were whole. And wholeness cannot be possessed. It can only be respected. If he ever returns, it will not be for you to fix him. It will not be for you to open the wound again. It will be because he finally heard what you were saying when you said nothing at all. But by then, your world may have changed. Your energy may no longer bend in his direction. You will have filled the spaces he left empty with your own voice, your own softness, your own sacred silence. The feminine silence is not a pause. It is a pivot. It turns the story inward. It rewrites the ending. It leaves behind the myth of self-sacrifice and steps into the truth of self-choosing. And if he ever does understand it truly, he will not try to break it. He will bow to it. Because some silences are not made to be interrupted. They are made to be witnessed.
There is something almost mythic in the woman who walks away without a sound, not as a tactic, not as punishment, but as liberation. She is not retreating in defeat. She is returning to origin, to the wild, to the womb of her own becoming. She is no longer asking the world to see her. She is learning to see herself, and that is the most sacred transformation of all. In Jungian terms, this is individuation, the process of becoming whole, of reconciling the conscious and unconscious, the light and shadow. For the feminine, this often begins in heartbreak, in exhaustion, in the sudden realization that her energy has been spent on emptied spaces and unavailable men, that she has poured rivers into cracked vessels, hoping something might hold. But now she knows. She is the vessel. Her silence becomes the chalice, pure, untouchable, holy. And within it, she alchemizes every wound into wisdom, every regret into redirection, every betrayal into clarity. There's no need to prove anything to him anymore. Not her worth, not her love, not her loyalty. If he cannot feel it in her presence, he will drown in the memory of its absence. The ego learns slowly, but the soul learns deeply, and some lessons echo forever.
The man who once dismissed her softness now dreams of her silence. Not the kind that waits, but the kind that no longer watches. He is not haunted by the woman who begged for love. He is haunted by the one who stopped needing it. The one who realized that real love does not require translation. That the right man would never need to be convinced of her value because he would feel it in her breath, in her silence, in the spaces between her words. And now, she moves differently. She speaks less. But when she does, it is with precision, with self-respect, with a tone that says, I no longer bleed for those who won't bandage their own wounds. Her silence taught her what love without boundaries is, self-abandonment, and she will never abandon herself again. This is not bitterness, it is clarity. It is not anger, it is evolution. To those who still fear the silence of a woman, know this: it is not your fear of her quiet that troubles you. It is your fear of what you hear inside yourself when her voice is gone. That is the echo you dread, the emptiness you tried to fill with her presence. But the woman who becomes whole in your absence is not your enemy. She is your mirror. She is your catalyst. She is the one who refused to be devoured by your avoidance. And in doing so, she called you toward your own awakening. Some women become memories, others become monuments, and the ones who leave in silence, they become myths. Because long after her body is gone, long after her name fades from your mouth, her absence still speaks. It reshapes your choices, it haunts your reflections, it remains as the unshakable truth. You had something rare, and you weren't ready. So she became the story you can't finish, the silence you can't interpret, the woman who no longer speaks your language because she has learned to speak her own. And now, you watch her from a distance. Not physically, perhaps, but psychically. You see her glowing, not because of you, but because of what she found when she walked through the fire alone. Her silence was the rite, her solitude the temple, her absence the initiation, and her return to herself, the only redemption that ever mattered. She does not need to be heard to be known. She does not need to be seen to be felt. She does not need to be chosen, because now she chooses. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.